All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our August pecan topics, and want to welcome everyone today. We've got a lot of information. We've got Zhang's going to talk, and Charles Rohla, and Phil Mulder, and so we're going to go through pretty quickly on our topics, but we will see what we can find out today, what was going on in August with pecans. So some of the things that are located on that fact sheet, the 6200 calendar for pecan growers for the month of August, is insect monitoring and control. And Phil's going to be talking about what type of insects we need to be looking for at this stage, but we know that Weevil is a big one, and Aphids and a few other things. So he will talk about that in a little bit. We're going to talk about crop load thinning in the water stage, and that is usually at this time of the season on most of our varieties, especially in the central and northern parts of the state. The southern parts may be advanced a little bit further. Usually the water stage starts in the late July and into the middle part of August on most of our pecans. And we're going to talk about how to decide how to find out what stage your pecans are at this month. And also, I hope you got a chance to watch the video that I shared that Charles and the Noble Research Institute had shared about crop load management. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. We'll also talk just a little bit on disease control, on irrigation, on soil preparation, getting ready for harvest for the upcoming season, and what we need to be thinking about and getting the land ready. That's something that we need to be concerned with right now. Think about removing cattle from the orchard, and then locating a market for the pecans. Now, I know that the crop is down a little bit across some areas of the state, but I'm hearing from other people that things are looking a little bit better than what they first anticipated in the season due to that late April freeze. A lot of people lost quite a bit of their pecans on the trees, but I think they're finding that there's more nuts up higher in the tree this year. And so that's good news. I saw some people that were out shaking their trees, and so that indicates that they're having a large enough crop to need to be crop thinning. So that's good news for the state. So whenever we talk about water stage and gel stage and dough stage, how do we actually decide what stage we're at? How do we know? So what I've done, I've taken some close-up pictures here. We've got a pecan. This is the stem end where it's attached to the shoot. And you can see it's kind of an oval shape. It's like a football shape. And so we want to cut through this football or this oval at a particular direction. If we cut through one way, we're going to get a different view. And so we want to get the view when we cut directly across this short side of the oval, or right through the middle of the football. And so here's the picture showing where we're cutting through. Now, if your pecans have started to get into the shell hardening stage, you really need to be careful because you can slip and cut your fingers if you're doing this when the shells start to harden. But when we cut them through, right through the middle of that oval, then it shows us the inside of the pecan. And in a little bit, Lou's going to give us more detail on some of this, the inside and the development, but I'm going to show you just what it looks like at this stage in August. And so here I've cut through the pecan to expose what's going to be the kernel, the embryo right here. And so we'll take a look at a little bit more on this. Now, when we cut through the long side of that football down the middle, we're going to get something that exposes this type of view. So we're going to see where the packing material is. So this is the right direction, this is the wrong way. So we want to cut through to get the right view. And some people actually cut through the middle of the pecan, and this is useful as they start to fill. But if we're looking at the development stage, we want to do it this way. This we'll use a little bit later, but not right now. So what exactly are we looking at whenever we cut through that pecan to give us this view? So if you look at the drawing on the left side, you can see we've got the shuck on the outside. We can see the shuck, and then the shell will start to develop right in this area. You can see the shell. Then this is the ovule inside. This is the packing tissue, that reddish material that's inside the pecan at harvest. That's called packing tissue. And then the embryo right here, this is seed coat, this is the embryo, and it's filled with liquid endosperm in the water stage. So we can see it starts to develop from the bloom end. It attaches to the tree at this end, and this, whoops, it attaches down on this end, and this is the bloom end. And it starts filling from that bloom end back towards the point of attachment on the tree. And so you can see whenever this starts to expand, it will go ahead and push on down into this packing tissue, and it will become more expanded. So this is about maybe 60% expanded. It will go ahead and fill on out down in here, whereas this one has just started to expand, so it may be more like 20% expanded. And so there's a lot of terminology that we use, but this is just kind of a little explanation about what you're looking at when you cut them open. So you hear about the water stage. So this would be considered water stage. It has liquid inside. When you cut it open, there's actual liquid that pours out, and it can stain your fingers and your clothes. So you can tell a good pecan person this time of the year, they have brown fingertips because they've been out there checking what their pecans look like. And then once it starts to develop those cell walls, it forms this gel stage. And so this is a signal that things are about to start happening with our kernel fill. And so once it gets to the gel stage, then it starts forming dough, and that's our actual kernel fill. And so there's a lot of things happening inside that pecan. We may not be thinking there's much going on, but there's a lot happening, and it's going to take different management needs at different stages, things we need to be considering. So it's a good idea to be looking at these stages through as we're at the end of July and into August especially. Now, normally at this time I've been showing you clusters of Kansas, Pawnee, and Merrimack on the tree, but right now I'm going to show you what the nut development looks like on August 6th at the Cimarron Valley Research Station in Perkins. And so right now, the Kansas, they're pretty much 100% expanded in the water stage. Pawnee, they're about probably 65-70% expanded and in the water stage. And Merrimack's more like about maybe 50% expanded. So they're all progressing. So just wanted to show you, Kansas normally is going to be ripening a little bit earlier than Merrimack. So you can kind of tell by that, that stage of development. So if we look at Kansas and what it looked like on July 16th, 23rd, 29th, and 6th, you can see how it started off right here, not much happening. And then on the 23rd, it's expanded on more, and it looks like it's 100% expanded, but it's going to go ahead and push this packing material on a little bit more and fill out. So here's the July 29th, and here's August 6th. So you can see it's gone ahead and expanded, pushed that packing material out more and filled up those spaces. So you can see it's done a lot over just a few weeks' time. And then if we look at Pawnee, you can see how it's advanced from the 16th of July, the 23rd, the 29th, up to August 6th. And so it's a little bit behind where Kansas was, but it's making progress and keeps advancing in development as well. When we look at Merrimack, it is at July 16th. We see it's not doing that much. It's developed a little bit more here, expanded a little bit more, and today it's out a little bit, maybe like 50% expanded. So it's a little bit slower, but it's kind of more of a mid-season ripening variety, so you could expect it to be behind Kansas and Pawnee. Now, why do we need to know what these stages are? Why do we just wait and let them, grow, and then we'll just pick them up and harvest them when it's time? Well, we need to know what's happening for different management techniques. So if our trees are very loaded with pecans, we need to be monitoring those stages. And during the water stage, we need to be thinking about when that kernel is expanded, maybe 25 to 75 to 100% expansion. That's when we need to be doing our crop load thinning. If we try to do it too early, it won't have enough mass. If it doesn't have enough water in it, it won't shake off as well. If it gets into the gel or the dough stage, then we're losing the benefit to the tree. So we want to be in that water stage when that embryo's expanded. About 25 to 75% is pretty much ideal. Now on Weevil, it's very important that we're monitoring this development, because when we get to the dough stage, that signals when those Weevil can actually start depositing eggs inside the nut. When they're in the water stage, when the Weevil are feeding, they're going to drop on the ground, and we won't have them during harvest time. But if we wait till after dough stage begins to start monitoring for Weevil, we may end up with some eggs inside those nuts or some larvae inside the nuts feeding. So we also can look at when shell hardening starts, we know that our sizing is complete. Those pecans aren't going to get any bigger. And also when the shell is hard, we know that scab is more of a cosmetic issue than a quality or a size issue. If we have scab early season and those pecans are trying to size, if it gets too covered on the shuck, they may drop off, or they may have quality or sizing issues. But if your pecans are fairly clean up to this point, you start to see some scab lesions, it's more of a cosmetic issue. And irrigation at the dough stage is very important to really pour the water on them to get them to fill out completely. Before they get into that dough stage, all that water is still, before they're at the shell hardening stage, they're sizing that pecan. Once they get to the dough stage, it starts to fill out the kernel. And then Charles also mentioned earlier to me that if you have a history of hickory shuckworm, a spray at shell hardening may be a good decision, may want to monitor for that. Phil probably will talk a little bit more on hickory shuckworm in a bit. I just wanted to point this out. We had someone had sent me this picture. This is probably stink bug feeding on a pecan, and it's dropped off on the ground. So the inside is black, and when we have stink bug or leaf-footed bug feeding prior to that dough stage, they will drop off on the ground. And then after, when it's in the dough stage, you're going to start to get kernel damage in those bitter spots on the kernel at harvest time. So we don't want to see this. It's a really, it can dock your pricing when you're trying to sell your product at harvest time. One thing I wanted to point out is just because you see one nut at shell hardening or one nut at water stage doesn't mean all your varieties are going to be at the same stage at the same time. So when you have, this picture was taken last year in September, and so when you have a peruke that's filled out quite a bit, it looks really close to harvest even, you may have Caddo or Oconee that are still in the water stage or the gel stage. So you need to be considering where you might need to protect your peruke, your Kansas and Pawnee from Weevil. You may not have to worry about Caddo and Oconee at the same time. So if you have blocks of different varieties, you may be able to manage them at different times based on the stage that they're at. So it may be too early to do crop load thinning on Oconee the same time you're crop load thinning Kansas. So those things are all things you need to take into consideration, and that's why it's important to check the stages of development on your kernels. I wanted to point out that the Oklahoma Pecan Growers Association has a fall field day and special business meeting scheduled for Saturday, September 19th, and that's going to be in the Skytook area. There will be more information sent out soon, but you can email Cheyenne Sloan at the Oklahoma Pecan Growers to go ahead and register, or to get information on how to register or how to become a pecan grower member. So they also have a Facebook page that is up and going. You can check that out. And they're working on a new web page, and information should be coming out to you if you're a member monthly. So just wanted to mention that. If the coronavirus gets worse, or we feel like it may be a safety issue, it may be canceled. But right now they have one scheduled for September 19th. Also want to mention that we have monthly Zoom scheduled for September 11th, October 2nd, and November 6th. So put those on your calendar, be ready to watch them, be ready to register for these upcoming Zooms. We'll be talking about topics that are appropriate for each month during those seasons. So that's it for me. So I think next we're going to have Lou, and she's going to talk about the development and how drought may be affecting pecan development. Lou, can you share? Can you try to share your screen? Okay.
Yes, I can do that now. Okay. So hello everyone, this is Lou. Can you see my screen now? Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
My topic today is pecan nut development and drought stress. So if you attend the OPGA last year, you may still remember I showed these pretty flower pictures in my talk. So today we will continue from this flower to discuss how a flower develops and matures into a nut. So this flower, when you cut it longitudinally, you will see the picture like this one. It has a big head on the top of the flower. That is a stigma. This structure will accept the pollen. And in the future, actually, after the pollination, after fertilization, the stigma will degenerate. At the bottom of the flower are the ovary wall. And for the pecan flowers, that's very special because it has a fused calyx. Inside the ovary, there is an important structure. It's called ovule. The ovule in the future will develop into the kernel. Let's take a closer look at what's within this blue rectangle here. So for the ovary wall and the fused calyx, the inner side of the ovary wall will develop into the endosperm, the inner side. So that is the shell of the nut, and the outer part of the ovary wall and the fused calyx will develop into the shock. So the inside the ovule, it consists of two important parts. One is called embryo sac. This one will develop into kernel in the future. And the outside layers of the ovule are integuments. These will be the seed coat. I will further talk about the importance of the seed coat in our current research. But now let's take a look at how the embryo sac develops into kernel. Here, after the pollination, after the fertilization, the embryo sac, you see here, there is a sac. It seems there are some cells there. We call it 8-nucleate embryo sac. This one will develop into two important parts. One is called endosperm, another is embryo. Actually, endosperm is the nutrition. They will provide the nutrients for the development of the embryo. And this structure, the endosperm, will disappear in the future. The embryo, the main part of the embryo is called a cotyledon. Actually, that is the part we will consume. That is a kernel. For the embryo, not only it has the cotyledon, it also has a shoot meristem and a root meristem. But here we say the important part for us is a cotyledon because we consume that. That is not meat. So since we have discussed what is the endosperm and what is the embryo, let's take a look at this. We are ready to talk about what are the water, gel, and those stages. Just now, Becky has showed you a lot of pictures of these 3 stages. But now here, my question is, the tissues at the water, gel, and those stages are the same, but at a different status, or the tissues, they are totally different things. Let's take a look at the picture here. We cut this nut in half. And guess what the stage of this one? You see water. Yes, that's a water stage. And let's take a look at where is the embryo, where is the endosperm. Here. So actually, you can see we call a nut water stage. That's because the endosperm is liquid. And the reason why the endosperm is liquid, that's because usually for the plant cells, we have cell walls. So the cell walls, it forbids the particles, the contents inside the cell to move. But now the endosperm at this stage, they are at the free nucleate stage. So that means those cells, they do not have any cell walls. The particles, the cytoplasms, they can move. They are free to move. So these are liquid. And then after the water stage, a layer of cellular endosperm will be formed from the free nucleate endosperm. So that means at this stage, at the gel stage, the endosperm cells start to have the cell walls, and they get thickening and visible. Actually, Becky just showed you they are transparent. And then after the gel stage, that is the dough stage. You can see in the picture, we can see the main part of the embryo, the cotyledon here. It will expand the full length of ovule. This cotyledon is very thin at the beginning. It's very adjacent to the seed coat. And then it will get a thickening and replaces the cellular endosperm. So you can see water stage, gel stage, and the dough stage. Actually, that is the endosperm. The water and the gel stage refers to the endosperm, but the dough stage is the cotyledon. So last year, in 2019, we tested how the nut developed from the very beginning, the fruit set through the whole harvest. So we used the AI technology. We measured the area of shock, the area of shell, and the area of embryo. And now you can tell the last one, I say the area of embryo. Actually, that's not the only embryo. It includes everything inside the seed coat, including the endosperm, including the embryo. So let's take a look at how the result looks like. This is a graph. It shows the kernel, shell, and shock development of Cancer cultivar in Perkins in 2019. The horizontal axes are the dates we collected the samples. The ordinate are the area of the embryo, shell, and shock. So from this, the blue curve is the shock, the green curve is the shell, and the red curve is the embryo. So from these 3 curves, you can see these 3 structures, they follow the same pattern, the sigmoid pattern. You can see they grow slowly at the beginning, and then they have a faster growth in the middle of the season, and then slow down again toward the end of the season. You can see the highest growth rate is from the end of July through August. And we know in Oklahoma, we usually have a very dry, we are very dry here in Oklahoma, the end of July and through the August. And also most of the nuts are at the water stage. So our question is, does the drought influence the nuts water stage? In other words, that means if at this stage we do not give the nuts enough water, whether these curves will be changed. supported by OPGA this year, we're working on this irrigation management project, and we will keep you updated of our research. But here I would like to show some what I'm thinking about how this drought stress could influence the water stage. So here again we can see the seed coat here, the picture. And you can see this is the packing tissue. That is a connection. They provide the nutrients, provide the waters to support the growth of the endosperm and the embryo inside the seed coat. And actually, you can see the whole seed coat looks like a balloon, water balloon. You give the nutrients, you give the water into the seed coat. And actually, there is a theory that is the increase in volume of liquid endosperms forces the enlarging of seed coat and it determines kernel size. So that means, you have the water potential, the pressure push the water, push the seed coat to grow. So if at this stage you do not give enough water to your nut, the seed coat cannot enlarge. So like this one, it was took by Becky. You can see from the nuts on the left side, you do not give enough water for the nuts, and the whole size of the nuts and the kernel looks like this way. But the nuts on the right side, it has the normal irrigation. You have the normal size of the kernel. So from this talk, I would like to hope you to consider to give enough water for your nuts at the water stage to hope to get a full developed kernel. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Lou. That was good. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
All right. Charles, would you like to share your screen now? Lou, you may need to stop sharing for a minute. Thank you.
All right, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, today I've been asked to talk about how do you determine crop load on your trees. And if you remember, whenever we talk about crop load on pecans, we don't want 100% of that tree setting fruit. And so to determine how much crop is on the tree, we need to actually go out and visually inspect that tree and count how many terminals or shoots have a cluster. And it can be, the cluster can be one nut or it can be 9 nuts. It counts the same. So as you walk up to a tree, I always like to start away from the tree and walk up towards it. And as you do this more and more, your eyes kind of get trained to picking out the pecans versus the leaves. They are a different color. And so you can pick it up a lot quicker. But if you need to walk up to a branch like the one I'm showing here, you can walk up to it, look at the terminals, and start counting. How many terminals do I have that have a cluster on it? And then how many do not? And so if you look at this picture, I've circled 10 different terminals, 7 that have a fruit on it, and then 3 that is vegetative, that do not have any nuts on it. So that tells me this branch is 70%, or has a 70% crop. One thing you need to remember is as you're looking to determine this crop load around the tree, you might have trees that have a lighter crop on one side versus the other. The crops might be heavier at the bottom of the tree, or in a lot of cases, what I see is most of the crop is in the upper portion of the tree. So you need to walk around the tree and inspect around the tree from the bottom to the top to help you determine this crop load. And you'll want to do this on really each tree through your orchard if you're thinking about fruit thinning. Whenever you're on improved cultivars, we do recommend fruit thinning if you have too big of a crop. If you have native trees, unfortunately, fruit thinning does not work because the trees are too large and the nuts are not large enough or weigh enough to be able to shake out. So you do want to, if you have improved varieties, you do want to determine this crop load to help you determine if you need to shake or not. This year, with our late freeze, in some parts of Oklahoma, you might notice a really light crop on the bottom of the tree. And so most of your crop's going to be in the top part of the tree. If your trees are overcrowded and so it's getting shaded in the bottom, you might still see the same thing, not much of a crop versus a larger crop on top. If you are fruit thinning or have improved varieties, one thing you need to remember is that a full load on a tree is, depending on nut size, is between 50 and 65% of that tree producing nuts. And what you're wanting to do is balance that tree at that number, so then that the following year you can have a return bloom and have a crop the following year. Things that crop load really affects is, Lou already mentioned nut size due to water deficiency, kernel percent or kernel quality. The other thing we have noticed is a heavy crop load will affect coat hardiness. We have seen trees in Oklahoma, in southern Oklahoma, in fact, 15 to 18-year-old trees with a extremely heavy crop that was allowed to carry the crop through the year. The following year, due to a hard winter, die completely to the ground. And so on certain cultivars, you can have severe damage from winter damage. The other biggest thing that I say is a problem with crop load, what it affects is your return bloom the following year. And that's really, as pecan farmers, we're worried about a consistent production year to year. And so this return bloom is important for us. If we have a tree that has above that 65% crop, it's going to affect your return bloom the following year. Some other problems you'll see in the orchard with your nuts, if you have a large crop, is vivipary. That is where the nuts, with warm weather late, right before harvest, and so certain cultivars, especially thin shell ones, will actually start germinating, and you can lose a lot of your pecans due to this. The other problem is stick tights. You can have the larger your crop on your tree, crop load on your tree, the higher percent of stick tights you're going to have and not be able to sell. And then with all those nuts in the tree, all the leaves, there's a lot of weight on those branches. And so if you have a large crop, you're going to have more limb breakages. And so that's another good reason why we want to crop thin, is so you don't lose majority of the canopy of your tree due to the weight of what that tree is carrying. So that's a quick overview. Hopefully everybody did get to watch the video. The video was shot during a workshop that we had last year. And so that kind of takes you through. Hopefully Becky will have her video out soon. And that's a really good visual of crop thinning for you to go back and look at if you're planning to do crop thinning. So Becky, if there's no questions, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, Charles. And I will be sure and send out that link with your video and hopefully with the video that we just produced this past week. And so I'm waiting for a little bit of tweaking on that video to be finished before I can send it out. But I will distribute that as well with a link to this recording. So I want to mention that, Charles was talking about crop load. People have asked, they're like, well, do we have to look at each individual tree whenever we're trying to decide if we're crop load thinning? It is important. You have a spotter and someone on the shaker. And so you've got, it's best to have 2 people to monitor what's in the middle of the tree when you're doing that shaking, and have someone looking up in that middle portion of the canopy to determine if the shaker needs to stop or continue. Because like Charles said, you know, your top portion or your bottom portion may have more crop. And so that middle section is kind of a good balance of how it's going to come off the tree. A lot of the time, the bottom portion of the tree just doesn't have as much shake, and it's you're not going to lose as much. So if you're looking at the bottom, you'll keep shaking that tree until there's nothing at the top. So you kind of need to look in the middle. But those videos that we have put together should demonstrate that a little bit more. All right, Phil, you ready to go ahead and talk about some of the insects we need to be watching for?
I'm ready.
All right.
Am I ready? Can I share my screen?
Go ahead and share away.
Okay, let's see, where is it? There it is.
There it is.
Okay.
That's good.
So, and I'm not seeing it for some reason.
It is up on my screen.
Okay. We'll just proceed then. So I want to talk briefly about pecan weevils. We talked about it to some extent last time we gathered, and we'll continue to talk about it. So this is the situation that we're trying to avoid, is the pecan weevil larvae, or the grubs, feeding inside the nuts, and you can get as many as 3 or 4 larvae inside one nut, and of course nobody wants to see that. So this is one thing you're trying to avoid. And if you see this sort of perfectly rounded hole at the end of the season, or maybe on an old nut that never got harvested, that's an indication that the larvae have exited the nut. So you may see more than one exit hole. And with all the rain that we've experienced lately, weevils emerge after those heavy rains. And pecans are susceptible generally from maybe a late gel stage to shuck split, but we're really concerned about oviposition, not so much about feeding damage. Weevils only feed about on one nut every 4 days. So I don't worry too much about the feeding damage, but I do get concerned when we have a lot of oviposition or egg laying occurring out there. They could feed on the nuts in the water stage, but like I said, those nuts generally abort. So that's the time when we don't worry too much about weevil. We want to worry about them when they're in that dough stage, because this is what can occur. The female, of course, can lay anywhere from 15 to 30 nuts over her, maybe even up to 50 nuts over her lifetime, and she'll put 2 to 4 eggs in each individual nut. Larvae feed for about 30 to 42 days, destroying the kernel. And what we're trying to do is monitor for these weevils from two aspects. When do they first occur? And if you've had your traps out since, say, like mid to late July, you've been capturing weevils, because we've had really good rainfall in most areas of the state that have pecans. We suggest 2 circle traps per tree, and we base our treatment, or at least our first treatment, we base that upon crop development. The second treatment we can base on how many weevils per trap per day, and our threshold for that is 0.3 weevils per trap per day, not per tree per day, but per trap. So we're looking at the number of weevils we're getting per each of those circle traps. And the circle traps, of course, can be obtained from Pecan Ag Equipment in Bristow. And when I say we're looking at a threshold of 0.3 weevils per trap per day, this is a conservative estimate. If the price of pecan goes up, if control costs stay the same, the threshold may actually decrease. So if we have 20 traps on 10 trees and no weevils on a Monday, but on Wednesday we caught 12, that represents 0.3 weevils per trap per day. So the number 2 represents the number of days since your last check of traps. And you can get more information on pecan weevil biology and the pecan weevil guidelines for the different trap types from a couple of our different fact sheets, 7179 and 7190. Well, we generally apply pyrethroids, some type of pyrethroid, but more than anything else because they're very inexpensive and they do a very effective job with pecan weevil. And we don't worry too much about resistance from pecan weevil because it has a 2 to 3 year life cycle. So, but remember that fruit are attacked by weevil in the water stage, and those will abort. But we need to consider mixing with an aphicide, perhaps for that second application, maybe even from the first application if it's been hot and dry and you're starting to see some sticky leaves. Organic growers can use this Grandivo WDG, which is out there right now. And we're experimenting with a Grandivo liquid formulation. It's not quite labeled yet, but that approach is very expensive because the weevil rate is 2 to 3 pounds, and 2 pounds per acre is about $30. So you better be receiving a very large premium for that application because you may have to make anywhere from 2 to 4 applications. Now, once you've reached that dose stage, this is generally about late August, to where there's no water in the nuts. You can cut them, maybe you can still cut them, and there's no water in the nuts, and weevils are present. That's when we want to treat them with an insecticide. What we suggest then is your subsequent application should be based on that threshold that we've given you of 0.3 weevils per trap per day. And immediately after you make the first application, you want to remove those trap tops for anywhere from 3 to 5 days. This allows those weevils that just aren't convinced that they're dead yet to succumb to the toxin. So then you place the trap tops back on after that 3 to 5 day period, and you should get, and theoretically, you should get 7 to 10 days of protection from that first application. In terms of aphids, and aphids can be a problem after that first application, especially if it turns out hot and dry. And what we've actually done to some extent is killed the predators that are out there. So we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye out for aphids when it comes time for that second application. We have 3 pretty common aphids in Oklahoma. I say pretty common, really the 2 yellow species, the black margin aphid and the yellow pecan aphid. I kind of lump them in and call them yellow aphids. Those are our most common ones. And the black margin aphid seems to be the most common. Black aphids, which are much darker, olive green to dark, almost blackish in color, they're a little bit less common and a little bit harder to spot. So that's the one that we really, really want to watch out for. But most of our populations, gratefully, are this yellow pecan aphid. Now, when I say gratefully, I say that simply because of the thresholds that we're looking at for yellow aphid complex, which is anywhere from 20 to 25 aphids per compound leaf. But with black aphids, I've actually seen thresholds mentioned anywhere from 1 to 5 aphids per compound leaf. I say 3 to 5 here because we rarely see infestations that high. If you have 1 aphid per compound leaf, they better be spread over a large area across that tree or several trees before you can justify treatment. Of course, aphids secrete honeydew, and that can support mold and mildew growth. Early defoliation can affect current crop. And the big point here is that if you get early defoliation, that's really going to affect your return crop. So you really want to retain those leaves as late into the season as possible. In terms of aphid infestations and combating the problem during the weevil season, you can incorporate any of these insecticides that I have here listed: Belief, Afil, Movento, Closer, Carbine, Centric, PQZ. There's several different ones. The one thing I would suggest to you is if you make multiple applications of an aphicide, be sure you rotate. And some of the materials that we've looked at in the last year were Closer, or actually 2 years ago, were Closer, Carbine, and PQZ. They all did a very good job. And fortunately, they all have different modes of action. We've also looked at Movento, and they all have different modes of action. So don't use the same thing multiple times in a row. Rotate to something else. You can also have the option of cutting and watering an application of Admire Pro on both sides of susceptible trees. But this is done normally before the problem really arises. So like in July, and because it has such a long pre-harvest interval. And so the reliability may be questionable if you don't get enough rainfall, or it may be questionable if you get too much rainfall. So that one is sort of, I guess I'd consider it more of a prophylactic treatment. You can rely on beneficial organisms and the weather to kind of eventually bring everything back into harmony, but there you're kind of putting the aphids in control at a time when it could be really bad. I don't think it's going to be as bad this year because we've had periodic rains in most of the major pecan growing regions. Fall webworm and walnut detainer or walnut caterpillar have been a problem for some growers throughout the year. And of course, webworms make their webbing on the terminal portions of the branches, and the walnut detainer does not make a webbing, but they feed extensively on the leaves and will just leave the rachises, or those little veins, intact, but eliminate all the leaf material. They have a habit of molting all together on a major branch or the trunk, and so you'll sometimes be able to spot that as a sign of walnut detainer. Simply cut out the webs for homeowners. Yeah, they can do that. They can treat with a BT preparation. If you have other problems for commercial orchards, those are managed. Webworms are generally managed, and they're generally a very minor problem because you're controlling things like case bearer, which are more of a nut pest than a leaf pest. So things like Confirm or Intrepid, those kinds of materials will do a very effective job of controlling webworms. And Intrepid and Confirm have a really long residual. You can use some of these materials with a high pressure sprayer to penetrate the webbing, but basically if they are going to feed on the leaves and continue to feed on the leaves, and the leaves are treated, they'll get a toxic dose and stop feeding them immediately. Webworms feed exclusively within the web, in the webbing, and the caterpillars are seen outside. If they are seen outside in the webbing or outside of the webbing, this means they're about to pupate. So you probably don't need to do anything at that point, but they can be pretty extensive in Oklahoma from time to time. We also can be concerned during that shell hardening stage with larvae of the hickory shuckworm. And I mentioned, and I have a picture of one that's actually emerging from a phylloxera gall. So if you have a lot of leaf phylloxera, this can serve as an early host for hickory shuckworm. Hickory shuckworms, the first generation, comes out at that time of the year when we don't have nuts present. So they really have to find sort of a hangout spot, and their hangout spot is sometimes in these phylloxera galls. So we want to kind of manage that phylloxera so it's not so bad and doesn't contribute to hickory shuckworm damage. And the damage that we normally see, it may be somewhat obvious on the outside. This one's not so obvious because this kind of looks like a maturing pecan. It may be looking like it's prematurely darkening, and it may or may not split open. The shuck may or may not split open because of the damage that's under the shuck, between the shuck and the shell. And you can see the amount of frass or bug excrement that will be sort of hidden between the shuck and the shell. And that's a sure sign that the hickory shuckworm's starting to work on that pecan. And eventually they'll feed in on the fruit portion of the pecan. The pupal stage is the overwintering stage, and it'll be in that in between that shuck or in the trash material that could get thrown out during harvest. So we want to kind of keep that in mind. The same things that control pecan nut case bearer, webworms, and walnut caterpillar will control hickory shuckworm. And that's what I mentioned here. September and October, we may have some other pests that arise, like stink bug and leaf-footed bug, that can still continue to feed on hardened nuts that even are past the shuck split stage. So your pecans are ready to harvest, and you can still have problems with these pests, and we'll talk about those later. The other thing that has arisen this year, is kind of unusual, is feeding from bagworms. These are different than webworms. They don't make webbing as such. They make little bags made of sticks and leaf material and everything, and they're enclosed within that bag. And the same materials that control webworm, walnut detaina, pecan, nut caseberry, and hickory shuckworm will control bagworms. But we've seen these problems arise on a number of different plants, including pecan. So sort of keep your eye out for those, and they could be a problem. But in some areas where management maybe hasn't been too extensive. And that's about all I have, Becky.
All right, thanks, Phil. I had a couple of questions. Can you stop sharing your screen for just a minute? I have a lot of homeowners with pecans, and they ask about what they can do for controlling pecan weevil. Because it's hard to spray because they're, they just can't get the right products or a sprayer to get to the top of the tree. So do you recommend using traps on those trees?
Yeah, that's about the only thing you can do as a recourse. Now, it's ironic that I actually spoke to a pesticide applicator yesterday who was treating for pecan weevil in an urban environment. And I warned him about all the things that could be associated with that, like neighbors and swimming pools and pets and so forth and so on. But it sounded like he was going to go ahead with the treatment. So one of the things that I suggested to him was to use something that's perhaps a little bit safer. And I say perhaps a little bit safer, 7 insecticide. But cats in particular, but dogs also, but cats in particular are very sensitive to 7 insecticide. So you have to be careful about that from your perspective as well as your neighbor's perspective. And then, of course, you don't want to poison anybody nearby that have children or even adults nearby. So what we suggest is trapping them out, utilizing, as best you can, utilizing the circle traps. Now, if we're talking about 1 or 2, 3, 4, maybe pecans in a given yard area and not too many neighboring pecans, we can do a fairly good job of trapping out probably 60 to 80% of that population. And that'll save quite a few pecans. But if you have neighbors that have pecans, once those weevils get up into that tree, if those neighboring trees do not have pecans in them, or if they are effectively fed on and drop, or they are oviposited in and don't present a good source of oviposition, then those weevils will fly. Weevils are capable of flying for quite a distance. And so they'll fly over to the next tree, and that may be your tree. So under those circumstances, it's going to be a tough sell to trap them out because they may fly directly into the canopy.
So it's not going to be foolproof that you're going to get them all, but you can at least reduce the number.
That's right. That's right. I had a grower that here near Stillwater that he had 3 or 4 trees, and we encircled these large trees with circle traps. And during the course of the season, he trapped out about 3,200 weevils from those 3 or 4 trees. And he had harvested pecans probably for the first time that year in about 10 years. Right. Otherwise, he was just eaten up by pecan weevil.
And so the traps are effective. And it's not something you can do just 1 year. You need to do it for several years. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. I have one other comment about, Phil showed those pictures of the shuck turning black a little bit. Charles, can you just speak just a little bit on maybe water split? Some of our areas are getting a lot of rain right now. And so I know I'm kind of just bringing this on you really quickly, but can you talk about water split really quickly?
Yes. So water split usually occurs just right at shell hardening. And what happens is you get an influx of water, either through irrigation or, for most of us, a heavy rainfall. and all that water influx into the nut causes so much pressure that that shell that is not completely hardened yet will go ahead and split. And there's actually two different stages of water split. That first one right at shell hardening. Usually those pecans will get a little black line down the shuck, and it can be, I've seen it with just a single one, sometimes two lines, and that black will spread out. Those nuts, if it's still in that water stage, they will go ahead and abort and fall off. If that shell is completely hardened and it's more in that gel or dough stage, you could actually see some water split, and sometimes you don't actually see the shuck discolored because it's just barely cracking through that hardened shell. But usually other diseases like anthracnose or something will attack those shucks later. But you might see that water split carried out through harvest almost. But generally, like Phil showed, kind of that long line, black line down the shuck right along the suture. A good management practice is if you're irrigating, make sure you're keeping your soil moisture at water capacity. And that way, if you have an additional amount of water, you're not automatically just flooding or overloading that soil with moisture. If you're at field capacity with your soil, that tree's able to take it up, and then you'd have a better steady stream of water into the tree.
So don't let it get dry and then a big rain or something.
Correct.
Just goes up too quickly. Okay.
Right. And,
All right.
and usually certain cultivars are going to be more prone to it than others, and usually thinner shell cultivars are more prone.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. I know that we've had some issues with that over the past couple of years in places. And, like Lou was saying, normally July and August are very dry and we don't get a lot of rainfall. But, this is Oklahoma and we don't do normal. We do, Oklahoma does whatever. So we have lots of fluctuations in what our normal is, I guess. So we'll go ahead and see if maybe Charlie or someone has something else they want to add at this point.
No, I think y'all did a pretty good job of covering everything. And as far as fungicide sprays, everyone should be coming up on their last spray. Typically, when we reach the middle part of August, that's when we make our final application. Any scab that forms usually after mid-August isn't going to have an impact on the nut finishing out its fill and having chuck split and everything, so we don't worry about spraying fungicides after about mid-August. Like I said, just remember to try to use the multi-site fungicide for that last spray, the phosphite, Super 10, something like that, rather than the strobilurins or the DMIs. And outside of that, I think I covered most everything else pretty well.
All right. Well, thank you. Is there any other questions today from any of our speakers that we had, or something that's totally different? If you have a question, you're welcome to let us know about it right now. You can either unmute or put it in the chat box. All right. Well, our next Zoom meeting is September 11th, and we're going to be talking about critters, not the insect critters this time, but we're going to be talking about controlling squirrels and crows and things that are trying to take our crop before we get it harvested. So we're going to talk about wildlife control. We're going to talk about getting your harvest equipment ready for that season, and we're going to talk about getting our orchard ready for harvest, and whatever else comes up between now and then, we'll add it in as well. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm going to I'll send everyone that's registered today I'll send them a link to that video if they've joined after the first email was sent. And then I'll send out a video link to the one video that I made as well. So you'll get to see both of the films. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me, Becky, BECKY.Carroll, CARROLL, at okstate.edu, or you can go to our Pecan Facebook page or Pecan Management webpage, and you can find contact information to ask any questions. And I'm sure any of our other speakers that we've had today would welcome your questions as well. If I don't know the answer, I have a lot of friends that are very intelligent and can help me with the questions if I don't know them. So I appreciate everyone joining. Is there anything that we need to say before we leave? Anything else? Anybody got anything to add? All right. Well, you guys have a good afternoon, and appreciate you joining us. I'll be sending out a survey link pretty soon as well. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Becky.
Bye, Phil.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.